Way too early. Bus candidates for 2025. Up next on Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Welcome into FBT in 5 on Saturday, October 26th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Chris Towers. And first up, bus candidate number 1 for next year, you have Brice Turang, Chris, who really was only a standout in one category. Granted, he was amazing. He had 50 steals. Those were the third most in baseball. I don't know what else he can do besides that.
Yeah, I mean, look, early on last season, he hit 280 in the first 3 months of the season, or 280 or better. So, like, if he could do that again, he makes a bunch of contact. Like, there are some skills here. He's a perfectly viable starter in a roto league, and even in a head-to-head points league, he'd be a fine option. The problem is, from that point on, he hit 214. He walks a decent amount. He's got zero power. He's not likely to hit an advantageous spot in lineup. So you add it all up, and like, if he hits 260, it's probably okay. If he hits 225, which is a realistic outcome, I mean, he wasn't much better than that in 2023, then it might not matter how many stolen bases he gives you. And look, it's worth prefacing all conversations about bust. Everything comes down to price. And if Brice Turang we get to March and he's being drafted 140th overall, I'm probably not going to have any problems with Brice Turang. Like that would probably be fine for the stolen base upside alone. If we're talking about having to invest a top 100 pick in him, there's no way I can do that. That's just, the overall skill set just is not strong enough at a time when steals just aren't that hard to find.
Let's move on to Matt Chapman, who just had one of his best seasons of his career, 247 with 27 home runs, 98 runs scored, and 15 steals. Granted, he had 11 total steals in his other 7 first seasons combined entering 2024. What has you down, Chris, on Matt Chapman?
The biggest thing is just this was a weird season for Matt Chapman. Like, a lot of the things about it don't make sense. Like you mentioned, 15 stolen bases, 4 more than he had in his entire career before this. Well, it's a new team, right? So maybe it's just the giant season thing. He's actually like a better athlete than I think a lot of people give him credit for. I think he was 84th percentile in sprint speed last season. Obviously, one of the best defensive baseball players I've ever seen in 30-something years watching baseball. But then there's also the fact that he had a 328 on base percentage. He hit 4th and 5th in the lineup, and he scored 98 runs. That was weird. Like, that doesn't happen very often. You usually see 98 runs scored from high OBP guys who hit a ton of homers or guys batting at the top of the line. So I think you look at those two things, and I just don't see those two things particularly being sustainable. I'm not also sure that I'd bet on 27 homers or a 247 batting average being sustainable in that park. So it seems like a situation where I don't really think Matt Chapman is a worthwhile top 12 third baseman, even at a fairly weak position.
Willy Adames is coming off a monster season where he had 32 home runs, 112 RBI, 21 steals. He is a pending free agent, so we'll have to wait and see where Willy Adames winds up the season. I think this is just pretty clearly you don't want to pay up for a career year from Willy Adames.
Yeah, and one thing it makes me think of, and it's a very different type of player, but it was Gleyber Torres. Remember that second season in the majors? He hit 38 homers. I think 13 of them were against the Orioles or something like that. It was like one of the highest totals we'd ever seen from one player against one team in a season. He's never come close to that 38. And that's the kind of thing that sticks out to me. And with Willy Adames, he had 13 3-run home runs this season, which tied the major league record and played a huge part in his, 113 RBI. He had a huge number.
112.
That was a pretty good guess. But, 30 homers, 21 stolen bases, 13 more stolen bases than his previous career high. Like, this is a solid hitter coming off a career year, heading into free agency. We don't know where he's going to play. We don't know what the lineup's going to look like, any of that. I think he's a solid player. I think expecting bad batting average, maybe 250, 25-ish homers, maybe 12 steals. Even that would be the second highest total of his career. It just not much of what Willy Adames did last season felt sustainable, even though I do think he's pretty good. Like this is not a bottom falls out situation. It's a don't pay for the career year, like you said.
Luis Gil had himself a very impressive rookie season where he had a 3.50 ERA, 1.19 whip. You watch him pitch, he's electric. He's got that hard fastball. He's got a really good slider and changeup, but took a step back in the second half, and control is a real problem for Luis Gil. So what has you out potentially on Gil heading into 2025?
Everything. So to start with, he had the 3.40 ERA. Underlying metrics do not back it up. 4.14 FIP, 4.36 xFIP. Even if you want to make the argument that, okay, well, there's something about Luis Gil, the amount of movement he gets on his pitches, the velocity, that makes it harder for hitters to pick it up. They don't hit the ball hard against him. He still had a 3.83 xERA, which accounts for quality of contact. That's fine, but it's not a standout number. And then you look at the final 17 starts. He was really good early on, uncharacteristically avoided walks. Final 17 starts, 4.92 ERA with just 3 quality starts in that span. So things really came apart. I know he had I think it was a back injury in that, or a lat injury. So that explains some of it. But then I think you also have to take into account he threw more than 120 more innings in 2024 than he did in 2022 and 2023 combined. So I think you also have a long injury track record, huge innings increase, and all of the performance red flags in there. It just, I don't know. I can see an outcome where Luis Gil takes a step forward with the control and like legitimately pitches like an ace, like Sandy Alcantara with less volume but more strikeouts. I think that's a possible outcome. Remember, Sandy Alcantara, someone who really struggled with control early on in his career as well. There's too many things working against him for me to make that bet.
Ronel Blanco of the Houston Astros is another pitcher who had a breakout season where he had a 2.80 ERA, a 1.09 whip, just under a strikeout per inning. But like Luis Gil, a lot of those underlying metrics not necessarily buying what Ronel Blanco just did.
Yeah, only 3 qualifiers outperformed their xERA by more than Blanco's 1.17 run gap. Nobody who qualified for the ERA title outperformed their FIP by more than the 1.35 run gap. So whichever one of those stats you go with, it just doesn't add up. Ronel Blanco, sub 3 ERA. It looked like around the end of the summer that we were finally able to relegate Ronel Blanco to the waiver wire for good. And then he comes out and gives up 2 runs in 24 innings in September, added on a couple of scoreless innings in the wild card game against the Tigers. I don't know. It feels like he might be okay. I could see like some Chris Bassett type seasons from Ronel Blanco here, but I think you look at the ERA, what was it, 2.80 this season, something like that?
2.80. Yep.
This is an ERA that probably should have started with a 4. And it seems like a streamer at best. He's another guy who had a big innings increase as well. The Astros had to manage his innings at times this season as well. So I think he's a late round streaming starting pitcher at best.
Again, that is Ronel Blanco. And if you want to read more about way too early busts, then you should subscribe to the FBT newsletter because Chris wrote about a bunch of them. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, and we will be back again next week. Bye-bye.